The United States now wants to sanction all countries that abandon the dollar. Yes, you heard it right. They want to sanction countries that abandon the dollar. For the United States, an important tool to impose their imperialist interest is their currency, the dollar. Thus, Washington deliberately uses the dollar as a weapon, literally, to economically ruin countries that wish to live their own lives. That is to say, to have their own path, their own way of development. There is also the use of sanctions, of course you know that. The United States these days has only one word: sanctions. And there is no subject, there is no complement: sanctions. Basically, they are telling us that Uncle Sam is angry, and he is very angry because there are people who no longer want to use their currency, yet they do not understand why everything is perfect in this currency, right? Their abuse of sanctions is what happened, for example, with Russia before and after the start of the war in Ukraine. The collective Western world, led by the United States, has imposed sanctions on Moscow and frozen hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian assets. When you talk about weapons, it's very violent, but the blow in fact backfired on them in this specific case. Under the leadership of the BRICS group of countries, de-dollarization was encouraged, for example by using local currencies in bilateral trade exchanges. In May, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, abbreviated as ASEAN, also announced plans for the de-dollarization of cross-border trade and naturally the use of local currencies. In the United States, these developments have been observed with growing concern. The guys panicked. What? They want to leave the dollar. And why? Indeed, the lower the dollar's share in the global domain, the weaker the dollar's soul becomes. As reported by Asia Times, Republican Senator Marco Rubio introduced a bill aimed at stopping de-dollarization in other countries around the world. That means in the United States, they can vote on laws, they can propose laws to impose on the rest of the world. It's a harsh message, isn't it? When we say these people think they are gods, that they believe they can do anything, you see how far it goes. So practically, how does it work? Basically, those who contribute to de-dollarization will now be sanctioned. Of course, I don't know if they even had another word besides sanction. Before we continue, know that you can subscribe to the channel for less than €3 a month. Also, for those who want to start on YouTube, we have a very detailed training on the most effective methods. By the way, I created a new YouTube channel called The Young Initiate where we talk about spirituality. All the links are in the description. Thank you for helping us grow by liking this video. Let's return to the topic. Asia Times reports Rubio's Sanctions Prevention and Mitigation Act aims to reduce the impact of sanctions. Would now compel American presidents to impose sanctions on financial institutions that utilize the Chinese CIPS payment system, the Russian SPFS transaction system, and other alternatives to the SWIFT system, which is fundamentally based on the dollar. As the newspaper further elaborates, Rubio is not the only one who wants to put an end to de-dollarization. Thus, the economic advisors of presidential candidate Donald Trump are discussing ways to punish states actively moving away from the dollar. Trump's team has already announced sanctions against both allies and adversaries who are actively attempting bilateral trade in currencies other than the dollar. The violators, those guilty of this heinous act of not using the dollar, would face import restrictions, tariffs, and currency handling fees imposed on them. Because obviously that's not nice. Who even told the US they were in a position of power? Or is it just a bluff? You know that in the history of this nation, which is filled with crimes, there are also a great many bluffs. The guys bluff quite a lot. Except now the situation has changed. It has been 10 years since all the sanctions they imposed on the BRICS have backfired on themselves. They might tend to forget it, but the massive de-dollarization started from a series of sanctions that made the BRICS members understand that the dollar wouldn't be of help to them. Today, it's the United States that owes billions to China. By the end of April, the US owed China, and since then, the debt has increased by billions. The debt has increased by billions more. Those in deepest debt tend to shout the loudest, who puff out their chests. And it's not as if their economists hadn't said the dollar would blow up in their faces. Nixon beat his chest, explaining that he had done his part and granted a reprieve to the American economy. Yet, time and again, there are economists who have sounded the alarm that this situation won't help them in the long run. The dollar has devastated the economy of a large number of South American countries, as well as many European, African, and Asian nations. The entire world has paid the price for this dollar, this currency. Now they are reaching their limit. They are completely suffocated by their own money and refuse to pay. No, they want the world to sink with them or pay all their debts. They haven't seen anything yet. Everything has a price, even if it takes thousands and thousands of years. Everything has a price. Now we discuss America's role on the global stage. International relations are currently undergoing major restructuring. The weight and influence of Western powers, led by the United States, are visibly diminishing. This decline is real and evident. What's happening to the global South countries? They are becoming increasingly powerful. It's remarkable that despite the obviousness of this phenomenon, it is only very recently that the United States has begun to notice and accept this state of affairs. They are now saying, well, these states we previously rejected, we are now forced to accept and acknowledge that there is a global process against them. They haven't seen anything yet.
The black world and the global South, we will go to countries where there aren't only black people. We will connect these worlds to strengthen and reinforce the force of opposition against Western hegemony.
The Israeli opposition newspaper Haaretz, which has been opposing Netanyahu's government for many years now, published an article titled, "The Ukrainian Crisis Could Forever Change America's Position on the Global Stage." The article criticizes Washington's policies, especially in foreign affairs, and the ineffectiveness of its sanctions as seen in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Russian president alone knows the future move in this situation. This crisis is not just about Ukraine, but something much larger and more significant. The author believes that China and Russia oppose the American concept of unipolarity and are bringing along a large population with them, a mass of countries summarized as the Global South. And this Global South stands in opposition to the world governance centered on Washington. They got fed up. At one point they said, "Go to hell." He suggests that the US imposes these Western ideas of dictatorial democracy and so-called human rights, which actually concern nothing but themselves, because in fact it concerns no one else but themselves. And they do it because they try, in a desperate attempt, to start setting the agenda, the rules, and to serve as the ultimate arbiter. So basically to dominate the entire international system. Obviously, they are subject to no restrictions, no regulations, nothing. Really, there are no safeguards for them. They are your safeguard, not the other way around. The article already indicated that if the Ukrainian crisis is viewed in a broader global context, it has every chance of being resolved in Russia's favor, especially considering the reputation of Putin as a strategic genius and wise statesman. So I want to remind you, this article was written on February 24th, before the special military operation, and the author claims that in case of conflict, Putin will therefore have to pay a political price. And it has reached the point where even American vassals falter against the BRICS economic power. The European Union seeks to avoid an economic confrontation with China, even though they assume it is unavoidable. It has decided to lower tariffs on certain electric cars from China that are massively imported into the European Union, thus eating into the market share of European manufacturers. Brussels, facing economic difficulties, wants to show Beijing its intention to avoid a large-scale trade war between the two major regions. Except that this concession, a crucial issue for China, was only decided after Chinese authorities strongly reacted to the European plan to raise tariffs on Chinese cars to 37.6%. The European official justified this almost prohibitive action because in fact at this level it is really enormous, by accusing Beijing of supporting its car manufacturers with state subsidies, which disadvantages their European counterparts. And then we agree it's a war. Now you are also trying to favor your European counterparts. That's literally how it happens. That means all the projects, all the big companies that are heavily funded, aided by the state, in Europe, what is it? It doesn't count. It's only when China does it that it matters. They have already taken you industrially. It's over. Just keep fueling xenophobia to explain your incompetence. That's all. They can't sell anything relevant anymore. And then they say we can't sell because of foreigners, as if everything boils down to foreigners. In this scenario, It's clear they can't match the foreigners, but the foreigners are at home. What will you do? Will you chase them away?
So there's a fight over electric cars between Europe and China. Yesterday, Brussels indicated it would significantly increase tariffs on electric vehicles coming from China. Will this have an effect, Marshall, on the price of these automobiles?
Yes, of course. And it will mainly benefit manufacturers who work with Europe or invest here. It's pure protectionism, and it's about time.
Trade tensions rise between the European Union and China. The European Commission announced Wednesday that Chinese electric car companies in the European market will face extra tariffs starting next month. The amount of this tax is not fixed. These extra tariffs will vary from X to Y, depending on the manufacturers. For the European institution, this measure is necessary to restore fair competition.
According to the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, ACA, in 2023, almost 440,000 electric vehicles, which represent a value of 10 billion euros, have been exported from China to the European Union, while the whole of Europe has only shipped about 11,000 electric cars to China, totaling less than 800 million euros. When we talk about financial imbalance, this is really quite significant. The share of Chinese electric cars in Europe rose from 3 to over 20% in just 3 years. This growth has therefore led Brussels to consider limiting Chinese imports by significantly increasing tariffs. Other Chinese tech products like solar panels and wind turbines are also subject to increased scrutiny by European authorities. In response to all this, China firmly rejected the accusations of unfair competition and filed a complaint against the EU with the World Trade Organization, the WTO.
The European Commission decided to lower tariffs to 9% on Chinese-made Tesla vehicles imported into the EU.
And afterward, a law of reciprocity was activated because Beijing retaliated by launching its own anti-dumping investigation on European products, including therefore the brandy. Brandy is wine, all the European wines there. Knowing that 99% of beverages are purchased by China for a value close to 2 billion euros, the European producers, especially the big French names like Martell and Remy Martin, immediately began to put pressure on Brussels to defuse the situation. Basically, that was it. They saw their business sinking. They said, true. And what about us? Do you think of our fortune? The Chinese strategy seems to have paid off. According to Euractiv, on August 20th, the European Commission announced a modest but symbolic reduction in tariffs on Chinese electric cars. Of course, the adjustments still need to be validated by the EU member states by October 30th. Joseph Borrell, the head of European diplomacy, declared that a trade war between the European Union and China seems very, very difficult to avoid, almost impossible. We must be realistic. We do not wish for a trade conflict with China, but it might be unavoidable, something we cannot prevent. That is what he stated to the South China Morning Post newspaper. In short, he believes that an escalation of tensions between the European Union and China stems from circumstances, while emphasizing that Europe should not seek to hinder China's growth. Because firstly, not only is it impossible to counter China's rise in power, and secondly, it is only the West that will pay the price if it tries anything. That's it. That was all for this video. Tell me what you think in the comments, and we'll meet again next time.